Okay, so in this video we're going to look at supply in the market, and this should be looked at after you've done the demand one. And basically the supply curve is just considering how many goods the firms that are in the market are willing and able, remember, to supply at each and every price. Okay. Another way to view this, and it's really quite important to do this because the supply curve causes quite a few problems for people, is to ask what price is needed in the market to produce a certain quantity. In other words, not how much supply there will be at every price, but also do it the other way around. How much price, what price do I need as a firm? How much are you going to give me to produce and supply a certain quantity of goods? And it's always better, like demand, to call it effective supply, the willingness of the firms to do this, backed up by the ability to sell the goods at any price. Okay, so willing and able again. Now, there's lots of factors that affect supply, but there's not as many as there are for the demand. But again, we've got to split them into these two. The price determinant is the price of the good itself, okay? And that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. And then we've got the non-price determinants, or what we do is we call them the conditions of supply, okay? And those are things like the costs of the firm. So when they're being asked how many will you supply, one of the first things a firm will do is, well, how much is it going to cost me, okay? How productive are my workers? So in other words, that's another way of looking at it, that if I've got to pay my workers a certain wage, I need to know how much output I'm going to get from each worker, and then that will tell me how much output at each and every price in the market. Okay, the weather, a big one in a lot of case studies, where you see that there's been typhoons or there's been a really good harvest, okay, and supply chains, and that's a really big one in the moment in the world economy. So it's worth having a look at supply chains and how difficult it is to actually get raw materials in, for example, so therefore they can't produce as much. But again, as we did with the demand, we've got to consider that we change one of these. Let's say we change the price, but we've got to keep all of these constant. Or we change, let's say, costs, and we keep the price of the good, the productivity, the weather, the supply chain, all constant. Okay, and that's this ceteris paribus assumption. Okay, so let's have a look. The price itself, that's what we're going to look at in this video only, is going to affect what we call the quantity supplied. It will move the market along the supply curve. Really important. Price changes move you along curves. And it's known either as an extension of supply. And what we're going to find is that supply will rise when prices rise, and I'll explain that in the next part, or contract. Contraction of supply. Supply falls when prices fall. So let's have a look at why that is actually the case. And basically start off with a situation here where the price in the market is £10 and the firm says, well, I will produce you 100 if you're giving me £10 for each one. And if the price rises to 15, then the firm might think, well, I can now afford to supply more in the market, and I'll explain why in a minute. And so there's an upward sloping relationship regarding the price and the quantity being supplied. And again, if the price rises to 20, then we're going to say we're going to increase our supply to 300. Now it's really important that you see, therefore, that as the price rises, there's an increase in the quantity supplied, and we call it an extension of supply. So the key about the supply curve, and it's really important to take some time to understand this, is that it reflects what we call the marginal cost of production. In other words, how much is it going to cost the firm to supply one more good in the market? And that obviously depends on the costs of producing those goods in the market. And so this is the key to this here is the key, absolute key to working out what's going to happen here. So if a firm has to produce more, it's being asked to produce, say, 200, where it was producing 100, two sorts of things might happen. And remember, we know that the total costs are going to go up because we're doubling our output as a firm. But the key is, this is the price per unit. So what is the cost per unit? Okay, for one good. And there's two ideas here. One is that the cost of the raw materials might go up because the demand for the raw materials are going up. So let's say this is a computer manufacturer, and it's saying, will I supply more computers? Well, as I demand more, memory chips and RAM and motherboards and all of that, the demand, I'm going to be demanding more as a firm, and so the price in the market might start to rise for me, and so the cost for every one is going to rise. The other way of looking at it is that the wages, that's the wages producing one good, might rise. And the reason that is that, let's say we were producing 100, then I might have employed, I don't know, let's say 10 workers to do that. But if I'm going to double my output, do I simply need another 10 workers? Well, they're not likely to be as productive as those first workers, because, as a rational firm, I'm going to employ the most productive people first. So instead of saying, well, I need 10 workers for this first 100, I now might need, I don't know, let's say 15 workers to produce the next 100, because they're not going to be producing as much per worker as all the others were. And so therefore the argument is that the wages, the wage costs, as it were, for producing one good might start to rise because of these less productive workers. So hopefully that's clear, and that this is really important when you get to this, because we are going to see that the supply curve is a reflection of the costs of the firm, and that is really useful later on in our economics. So let's just finish this though. Contraction of supply is obviously when there's a price fall and a reduction in quantity supplied. So moving on to the producer surplus now, not the consumer, that was the demand. Producer surplus, this is the surplus that the producer gets. So the idea is that let's take 100, okay, 100 goods being produced in the market, and I as a firm am willing and able to do so because it's costing me, for every one good produced, it's costing me £10. Now, if the price is up here, and you can see I've put in the demand curve now, and so the price is here, then basically, as a producer, I'm getting what we call a surplus, which is the difference between the 15 and the 10 that I'm willing and able to supply it at. So that distance there is known as the producer surplus. So I'm receiving as a firm 15, and I was willing and able to produce it at 10. Okay, next one, I'm receiving £4. Next one, £3 of surplus. And so we take those surpluses away, and we call those producer surpluses, and each of those, imagine if there was an infinite number here, would turn into a triangle like that, which is your producer surplus. And it's always the distance between the price in the market and the cost curve, because the cost curve here, the marginal cost curve, is our supply curve. So imagine this as an infinite number going up here from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. And then you've got your producer surplus. And remember, surpluses are really important in economics. Hopefully that is helpful for you, and in the next video we're going to bring the demand and supply together, and we're going to look at this whole issue of equilibrium.